Hey everyone. Tonight we travel across a choppy slate gray sea, peering through a thick mist that clings to your woolen cloak like a damp shroud. You can taste the salt on your lips, feel the rhythmic shudder of oars pulling through the cold water, and just ahead a smudge of deep green and purple heather emerges from the fog. This is the Isle of Man, not as a tourist on a comfortable ferry, but as a Norse settler around the 9th century. Let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive the landing. There's no pier, no helpful signs pointing to the gift shop, just a jarring scrape on a rocky beach and an order to jump into the waist-deep, bone-chilling surf to haul a longship ashore. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to see where you're all tuning in from. Drop your city or country and the local time in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that truly hits you isn't the cold, though your teeth are chattering a rhythm that could pass for a sea shanty. It's the silence. Not an absence of sound, but an absence of your sound. The world you know, the hum of electricity, the distant drone of traffic, the constant digital chatter, is gone. It's been replaced by the mournful cry of a gull circling overhead, the relentless wash of waves on the shingle, and the whisper of a steady, damp wind moving through the tall grasses on the dunes. You and your shipmates drag the vessel, its dragon-headed prow seeming to sniff the strange new air. Further up the beach, its keel groaning over the stones. Your back aches, your hands are raw, and your leather boots are completely waterlogged. Welcome to your new home. No welcome basket, no friendly neighbors bringing over a casserole, just an island, brooding under a sky the color of a well-used pewter cup. This island, Mannan in the local Gaelic tongue, is a prize. You can feel it in the way it sits squarely in the middle of the Irish Sea. From its highest peak on a clear day, you could see the kingdoms of England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. It's a stepping stone, a pirate's haven, a trading post, a fortress. That's why your people, the Norse, have been eyeing it for decades. The monks at the local monasteries learned this the hard way. One of the first recorded Viking visits here was a raid back in 798, a classic hit, and run that announced the arrival of new, rather aggressive neighbors to the region. But you're not here for a smash and grab, you're part of the next wave, the settlers. You're here to put down roots in this fertile, if rather damp, soil. As you move inland, away from the immediate shore, the landscape unfolds. There are no neat fields with tidy fences, just rolling hills covered in a tough, resilient gorse and heather. Flocks of sheep, sturdy and primitive-looking, stare at you with an unnerving, ancient intelligence. They seem to judge your flimsy modern resolve and find it wanting. A few of your companions start pointing out a local curiosity. You see a cat, then another, darting behind a dry stone wall. Something is missing. It takes you a moment to realize they don't have tails. This is the native Manx cat, and you can't help but chuckle at the thought that maybe they were just descended from a long line of felines who lost every single fight they ever got into. The truth, of course, is a natural genetic mutation, but it adds to the island's slightly off-kilter charm. You are not, however, stepping into an empty land. This island has been inhabited for thousands of years by a Celtic people, the Manx Gaels, and this is where the picture gets complicated. Your history books back home might paint a simple story of violent conquest, of Viking longships disgorging hordes of axe-wielding warriors who drove the locals into the sea. But as you walk, you don't see signs of a great war. Not yet anyway. You see small, round stone houses, the kind the Gaels build, their turf roofs making them look like natural parts of the landscape. Historians still argue whether the initial Norse settlement was a violent conquest or a more gradual integration through trade and intermarriage. The reality was likely a messy combination of both. For every raid, there was probably a trade. For every skirmish, a marriage alliance. The two cultures are about to begin a slow, centuries-long dance, and you've just arrived for the first number. You carry with you not just your axe and a few meager possessions, but an entire invisible toolkit of ideas. You have your gods, Odin, Thor, Freya. You have your social structure, your farming techniques, and most importantly, your concept of law. Back in the old country, Law isn't something written in a dusty book and locked in a library. It's a living thing, a spoken thing, held in the memory of the wisest members of the community. It's debated and upheld not in a stone courthouse but out in the open, under the sky, at a great assembly called a thing. This is the tradition you've brought with you. As you scout for a place to build your longhouse, you can already feel the need for it. Disputes will arise. Who owns this stretch of river? What's the penalty for a stolen sheep? Whose fault was it that Gunnar's boat wasn't tied down properly? Without a system, chaos will take over faster than the gorse on these hills. The island needs a heart, a central point where the law can be spoken and justice can be seen to be done. And somewhere, in the very center of this small strategic island, a tradition is about to be born on a small, unassuming hill. Weeks turn into months. You've carved out a life here, a small farmstead nestled in a valley that shields you from the worst of the Irish sea winds. You've learned the rhythms of the island, the sudden fogs that roll in from the coast, the surprising warmth of the sun when it breaks through the clouds, and the subtle shift in the wind that tells you rain is coming. The need for that central point of order, which felt abstract upon your arrival, is now a pressing, practical reality. A boundary dispute with your neighbor, a squabble over a strayed pig, an argument about the price of a wool shipment. These small frictions of life require a larger mechanism to smooth them out. And so you hear the whispers, the talk of the great assembly, the thing that will soon be held. You pack a small bag of provisions, some dried fish, a hunk of hard cheese, and a water skin, and begin to walk. Your journey takes you towards the island's heart. You follow a track that is less a road and more a suggestion, worn into the earth by generations of footsteps. You traverse the flat, boggy wetlands of the northern plain known as the Curraghs, where the air is thick with the scent of damp earth and peat. Then, the land begins to rise and fall in gentle green waves. You're not expecting a stone citadel or a grand hall. You know from the stories of the old country that your people prefer to do their important business under the open sky. But still, you imagine something significant. Something that announces itself as a place of power. Maybe a natural rock formation, a dramatic cliff, or a clearing in an ancient, imposing forest. You imagine a place that would look good on a postcard, if postcards and tourism-based economies had been invented yet. You crest a small rise, your boots sinking slightly into the soft turf, and a fellow traveler, a grizzled Manx Gaelic farmer leading a stubborn-looking goat, points ahead. There, he grunts, in a dialect that's a curious soup of his native tongue and your own Norse. The hill. You look where he's pointing, and your first reaction is one of profound, almost comical disappointment. It's a small mound, 4 distinct circular tiers of grass rising from the flat plain, looking for all the world like a hastily baked wedding cake for a giant with a minimalist aesthetic. It's barely 12 feet high. You've climbed steeper dunes on your way here. This is the heart of the kingdom. This is where the law is made. It seems less like a seat of power and more like a convenient picnic spot. But as you get closer, your perspective shifts. You walk the perimeter of its base and notice the precision of it. This isn't a natural formation. It was built. It was shaped with intention. The tiers are deliberate, creating levels, stages for some kind of performance. The grass is worn in pathways, especially one that leads from the base to the very top. You stand before it, craning your neck just slightly to look at the summit, and you realize its genius is in its humility. A fortress intimidates. A grand hall excludes. This hill invites. It's an amphitheater for the entire community. Anyone can stand on the surrounding field and see and hear what happens on its slopes. There are no walls, no gates, no guards to keep you out. The law, it seems to say, is for everyone, and it will be held accountable by everyone. You learn its name from others gathering in the area, Tynwald Hill. The name itself is a direct import, a linguistic fossil from your homeland. It comes from the Old Norse Thingvalar, which means quite literally assembly field. It's the same root word that gave Iceland its famous Thingvellir. It is a declaration in and of itself. This field, this specific patch of earth, is where we assemble. This is our thing field. It is a concept so powerful and portable that your people have stamped it onto landscapes from Scandinavia to the British Isles. The act of naming it was the act of creating it, consecrating this ordinary ground for an extraordinary purpose. Even now, days before the main event, the air feels different here. It's quiet, but it's a heavy, expectant quiet. You can almost hear the echoes of past arguments, the ghosts of old oaths sworn on this very spot. You walk over to a small, simple stone chapel nearby, dedicated to St. John. Its presence raises a question in your mind. Historians still argue whether the location at St. John's was chosen for its central geography or for its proximity to pre-existing sacred sites of the native Gaels. Did your Norse ancestors deliberately build their seat of power on top of or next to a place the Celts already held holy? Was it a power move, a symbolic absorption of the old ways, or just a happy coincidence that the most sacred spot was also the most convenient? The answer is lost to the mists, but the chapel and the hill stand as neighbors, a testament to the eventual blending of the two cultures. An old woman weaving a basket by the side of the track catches you staring at the mound. She tells you with a conspiratorial wink that you must always be respectful here. This isn't just a hill for men and their laws. It's a dwelling place for the Muinjer Vegi, the little people. She says they listen from beneath the turf, and if a law is unjust or a man swears a false oath, they have long memories and a penchant for mischief, or worse. It's a charming piece of folklore, a quirky tidbit you file away. It's a reminder that in this world, the legal and the supernatural are not separate domains. An offense against the law might also be an offense against the very spirit of the land itself. It certainly makes you think twice about littering. This combination of practicality and superstition seems to be the essence of the place. It is at once the island's courthouse, its administrative center, and a place where you'd better be on your best behavior, lest you anger the fairies. As you find a spot to make your camp, you look back at the simple, tiered mound, now silhouetted against a deepening twilight sky. It is unassuming, yet it is everything. The night before the assembly is cool and clear. You sit by a small smoky peat fire, the warmth a welcome comfort against the damp that seems to rise from the very soil of the island. Around you, hundreds of other small fires flicker like fallen stars, dotting the plain surrounding the silent hill. The air is filled with a low murmur of voices, the guttural Norse of settlers from Orkney, the lilting Gaelic-inflected Norse of those who came from the settlements around Dublin, and the sharp clipped tones of warriors from the Hebrides. This gathering isn't just for the people who live on Man. It's a convergence, a yearly pilgrimage for Norsemen from all corners of the Irish Sea. And as you share a piece of your dried fish with a trader who just sailed in from Jorvik, you begin to truly understand why this small island is so ridiculously important. You are sitting at the absolute center of the Viking world in this region. Picture a spider's web. The Isle of Man is the spider, sitting patiently in the middle, feeling every vibration. To the east is England, with its wealthy, tempting monasteries and burgeoning towns. To the west, Ireland, a patchwork of rival kingdoms and rich Viking port cities like Dublin and Waterford. To the north, the wild, rugged coast of Scotland and the chain of islands leading to your ancestral homelands. To the south, the Welsh coast. Any ship wanting to raid, trade, or ferry troops between these lands has to pass by here. Controlling this island is like controlling the main highway intersection in the middle of a continent. It's the ultimate logistics hub. Amazon would have killed for this location in the 10th century. The trader you're speaking with gestures with a thumb towards the coast. The sea here, he says, is a fickle beast. He's right. The Irish Sea is notorious for its treacherous currents, sudden storms, and unpredictable tides. Navigating it requires immense skill. Your people's longships are marvels of engineering, but the specific demands of these waters, darting between islands, raiding up shallow rivers, and making quick coastal hops, led to the development of related, more agile craft. You hear talk of the Berlin or the Nijveg, smaller galleys with both oars and sails, perfectly suited for the hit-and-run tactics and inter-island travel that define life here. Having a safe central harbor on Man to repair, re-provision, and wait out a storm is not just a convenience, it's a matter of survival. The island is a giant natural aircraft carrier and service station for the Viking fleets. This strategic importance gave rise to something grand, the kingdom of Man and the Isles. This wasn't just a local chieftaincy. For centuries, the ruler of this island was one of the most powerful sea kings in the British Isles. His domain was a sprawling, disjointed maritime empire of islands and coastal territories, stretching from the Isle of Lewis in the Scottish Outer Hebrides all the way down to Man itself. It was a kingdom held together not by roads and forts, but by the keels of longships. Tynwald Hill, you're realizing, isn't just the parliament for the Isle of Man. It's the capital building for this entire watery kingdom. The chieftains and lords who are now arriving on the plain aren't just here for local Manx issues. They are vassals and allies of the King of Man and the Isles, here to pay tribute, settle major disputes, and plan the year's, well, let's call it aggressive foreign policy. Of course, the reality of this kingdom was often a messy affair. A grizzled old warrior you share your fire with speaks of it in glowing terms, a unified Norse empire of the sea. But the traitor, a more cynical man, scoffs. A kingdom when it suits them, he mutters. A fleet of squabbling pirates the rest of the time. And in his grumbling, you hear the echoes of a modern academic discussion. Historians still argue whether the Kingdom of the Isles was a coherent, centrally governed state, or a much looser confederation of powerful sea lords who paid lip service to a high king on Man when it was convenient, and happily went their own way when it wasn't. The truth, as is often the case, was probably somewhere in between. A fluid, ever-shifting network of allegiances that was strong under a powerful king, and fragmented under a weak one. One year's mighty king was the next year's forgotten exile, a lesson that kept every lord here on his toes. You look again at the dark shape of Tynwald Hill under the stars. It makes so much more sense now. This place is the anchor point for a kingdom made of water and wind. While a king might enforce his rule with the sharp edge of a sword, that rule needs legitimacy. It needs the consent, or at least the participation, of the powerful men who command the ships and the warriors. It needs a place where that power can be displayed, where loyalty can be sworn, and where the laws that bind them all together, from a stolen pig on Man to a dispute over plunder in the Hebrides, can be heard and upheld. The hill is a piece of solid ground in a liquid empire, a point of stability in a world of constant motion. Tomorrow, when the assembly begins, you won't just be witnessing the governance of an island, you'll be seeing the heart of the Norse Sea Kingdom pump for another year. Dawn breaks, painting the underside of the clouds in shades of soft pink and gray. The air is cold and sharp in your lungs. Around you, the camp is stirring to life. The smell of wood smoke thickens, and the murmur of the previous night gives way to a more purposeful buzz of anticipation. The old warrior you shared your fire with is already awake, sharpening the edge of a small utility knife on a whetstone. He sees you looking towards Tynwald Hill, which now seems to be glowing faintly in the morning light, and he offers a grim smile. "Your first thing in these lands?" he asks. You nod, and he gestures for you to sit. Then you should know what this is. It is more than just a gathering. It is the heart of our way of life. He begins to explain that this assembly, this thing, is a tradition as old as your people. Long before you crossed the sea, your ancestors were gathering in clearings and on hillsides, just like this all across Scandinavia. This isn't some new invention for the colonies. It's a direct transplant of your most fundamental institution. He speaks of the great regional assemblies back in Norway, like the Gulathing, where thousands would gather to hear the law, pass judgment, and make decisions that affected entire kingdoms. What is happening here today on the Isle of Man is just one local branch, one new shoot from that ancient sprawling tree of Germanic law. It's a system you carry in your heads and hearts, and you plant it wherever you settle, just as you plant your barley and oats. The core idea, he explains, is simple. Law is not the private property of a king or a priest. It belongs to the people. It is a shared understanding of right and wrong, a set of rules that everyone agrees to live by, because it makes life better than the alternative, which is usually a messy cycle of blood feuds. The thing is where this shared understanding is maintained. It's where the laws are recited aloud, so no one can plead ignorance. It's where disputes are brought into the open to be judged by the community, rather than being settled with a knife in the dark. And it's where all free men, farmers, traders, warriors can stand and be seen, their presence a vote of confidence in the system itself. It's like the annual shareholder meeting for the company of your society, and everyone who isn't a slave holds one share. He pauses, then points a stern finger at you. But there is one rule that rises above all others here. The moment you step onto the sacred ground of the assembly, you are in summa helgi, in utter peace. The phrase hangs in the air. All feuds, all arguments, all hatreds are to be left outside the bounds of the thing field. If your worst enemy stands next to you, you will not draw your blade. You will not even give him a harsh word. Here we are all one people, under one law. Breaking this sacred truce is the ultimate crime. It is not just an assault on an individual, it's an attack on the very foundations of society. The punishment is swift and absolute. You would be declared an outlaw, a wolf's head, a man without law or protection, whom anyone could kill without penalty. It's the ultimate deterrent, a social force field that allows the business of law to proceed without descending into a brawl. It's a far cry from your modern-day town hall meetings. At this, the cynical trader, who has been quietly listening while mending a leather strap, lets out a short, barking laugh, the illusion of peace and the illusion of power. He looks at you. The old warrior speaks of the ideal. Let me tell you the reality. He argues that while all free men are welcome, their voices are not all equal. Historians still argue whether the thing was a truly democratic institution for all freemen, or a carefully managed stage for the elite to display their power and legitimize their decisions. The trader is firmly in the second camp. You think a poor farmer with 3 goats and a leaky roof has the same say as a chieftain with 100 fighting men and 3 long ships? The chieftain makes a proposal. His men all shout in agreement. The farmer can shout nay until he is blue in the face. It will be just a whisper in a hurricane. The old warrior bristles but doesn't entirely disagree. He concedes that wealth and power certainly speak loudest. But, he counters, even the most powerful chieftain ignores the will of the common farmer at his peril. If the laws become too unjust, if the powerful take too much, the free men can simply refuse to follow. They can leave. They can join a rival chieftain. A king with no followers is just a man shouting on a hill. So the thing becomes a delicate balancing act, a place where the powerful get to lead, but only if they can persuade the assembled masses that they are leading them in the right direction. It's a system of consent, even if that consent is sometimes manufactured. You realize that this exported tradition isn't just about sentimentality. It's intensely practical. In a new, potentially hostile land like this, your small Norse community needs to stick together to survive. The thing is the forge, where that unity is hammered out, year after year. It stops the settlement from fracturing into warring clans. It is, quite simply, the essential software for building a new society. A horn sounds in the distance, a long, low note that echoes across the plain. The assembly is about to begin. The time for talk is over. The long, mournful note of the horn hangs in the air, a command that silences the thousands gathered on the plain. You get to your feet, a ripple of movement spreading through the crowd as everyone rises. The casual, festive atmosphere of the camp vanishes, replaced by a focused, collective attention. All eyes turn towards the hill. A path is cleared through the dense throng of people, and a slow, solemn procession begins. This isn't the grand arrival of the king you were expecting. It's something quieter, more fundamental. It is a group of 17 men, each dressed in their finest woolen tunics and cloaks but bearing no weapons. They are the local headmen, the leading figures from every corner of the island. You watch, fascinated, as each man steps forward holding a small container. Some have carved wooden bowls, others simple leather pouches. They represent the 17 ancient parishes of the island, the fundamental building blocks of the Manx community. These are the names you've started to learn: the flat, sandy lands of Yerby and Andreas in the north, the rugged, hilly terrain of Mohold and Lonan on the eastern coast, and the southern strongholds of Rushen and Arbury. The island, you understand, is not a monolith. It's a mosaic of these distinct communities, each with its own character, its own people, its own soil. And today, they are bringing a piece of their home to the center. One by one, the men approach the base of Tynwald Hill. The first man, from a northern parish, opens his pouch and pours a handful of dark, peaty earth onto the lowest tier. The soil is almost black, rich from the wetlands of the Kuras. The next man steps up, his contribution a lighter, sandier soil that speaks of a life lived by the coast, the tang of salt almost visible in its texture. Another adds a reddish, clay-heavy earth from the central valley. On and on it goes, a quiet, deliberate ritual. They are not building the hill but renewing it. They are physically and symbolically recreating it from the substance of the entire island. It is a powerful piece of political theater. The message is unmistakable. This hill does not rule the parishes. It is made of the parishes. The law that will be spoken from its summit draws its legitimacy from the very ground of every community it governs. It's a beautiful, tangible representation of a unified whole, built from its constituent parts. As you watch this deeply resonant ceremony, it's impossible not to be moved. It feels ancient, sacred, as though you are witnessing a tradition that has gone on since the island itself rose from the sea. But you also remember the cynical trader's words. History is often a story we tell ourselves, polished and improved with each retelling. And so, a flicker of modern skepticism enters your mind. Historians still argue whether this ritual of adding soil was an annual occurrence in the Viking Age or a later invention to romanticize the hill's origins. Perhaps the truth is that the symbolism was always there, even if the ceremony itself wasn't so formalized. The idea that Tynwald represented all the people was what mattered, and this ritual is just a perfect expression of that idea. Whether it happened precisely like this in the 10th century or not, it's a reminder that traditions are as much about the meaning we give them as their verifiable, nuts and bolts history. While this solemn rite unfolds at the hill, the rest of the plain is anything but quiet. The Tynwald Assembly is also the Tynwald Fair, and the business of the people doesn't stop for ceremony. Just a few hundred feet from where the sacred soil is being poured, you see a man loudly arguing with a merchant over the price of a new iron pot. You see women comparing the quality of woven cloth, their voices a sharp counterpoint to the hush around the hill. This day, you learn, is the island's great reckoning. It's the traditional day for all debts to be paid. Failure to settle your accounts at Tynwald could bring great shame. It's also a hiring fair. A young farmhand whose year of service is up can be seen negotiating with a new master, a handshake sealing the deal for the next 12 months of labor. It's the original social network, a combination of LinkedIn, small claims court, and the county fair, all rolled into one noisy, chaotic, and essential event. The last of the 17 men has now emptied his bowl of earth onto the hill. The quiet ritual is complete. The headmen, their symbolic duty done, arrange themselves on the lower tiers of the mound, facing outwards towards the crowd. They are the foundation of the power structure, the link between the common folk and the lords who will soon occupy the upper levels. The hill now stands ready, its symbolic authority renewed for another year. A new kind of silence falls, a silence of pure anticipation. The crowd collectively turns its gaze down the wide, straight path that leads from the chapel of St. John. The stage is set. The overture is complete. Now it's time for the main performance to begin. A path has been cleared, stretching from the stone chapel of St. John to the base of Tynwald Hill. A surge of anticipation ripples through the crowd. Then, the procession begins. At its head are men carrying banners that whip and snap in the breeze. A black raven, a symbol of Odin and a common emblem for Viking warlords, and the three-legged Triskelion of man. Behind them walk the king's personal bodyguard, the herd, their spear tips and helmet bosses catching the morning light, their faces grim and professional. Then come the great lords and chieftains of the Isles, a riot of colorful cloaks and expensive imported fabrics, each trying to subtly outdo the others in their display of wealth. Finally, the King of Man in the Isles himself appears, walking with a measured, deliberate gait that speaks of absolute authority. But your eye is drawn to another figure, walking near the king, yet distinct from the warriors and lords. He is an older man, his beard streaked with gray, his face a roadmap of deep-set lines. He wears no gleaming helmet or fine jewelry. His clothes are well-made but simple. He carries no axe or sword, only a tall, smoothed staff of ash wood that he uses to steady his walk. Yet the crowd affords him a level of silent, profound respect that is second only to the king. The chieftains, for all their swagger, part to let him pass and incline their heads. This is the law speaker, the Log Sogumater. He is in this moment the most important man on the island. In a world without widespread literacy, he is the kingdom's memory. The entire legal code, the complex web of rights, responsibilities, punishments, and procedures that holds your society together, is not written on vellum scrolls locked in a chest. It exists in its entirety inside this one man's head. He is a living, breathing library of law. His position is one of the most vital in any Norse society, a direct import from the traditions of the homeland. It is his sacred duty to preserve the law, unchanged and perfect from one generation to the next. At this assembly, his primary job is to stand before the people and recite a third of the legal code from memory, ensuring that over a 3-year cycle, the entire law is heard by all. Imagine the pressure. No notes, no teleprompter, and if you get it wrong, you could plunge the entire kingdom into a constitutional crisis. It's a bit more stressful than forgetting a line in the school play. How is such a feat of memory even possible? You look at the law speaker's focused inward gaze and realize his mind must work in a way you can barely comprehend. The law he has memorized is not a dry prose document like a modern legal text. It's poetry. It is structured in rigid, rhythmic, alliterative verse. This poetic structure acts as a powerful mnemonic device, a mental scaffolding that makes the vast text easier to remember and recite. A law about property boundaries might sound something like this. A stone must be steady, a stake must be strong, marking the meadows where they have stood long. Move not the mark nor meddle with might, lest you lose land and live without light. The rhythm and the repetition of sounds make the words stick in the mind, turning legal code into something closer to a saga or an epic poem. It is law as art, a practical tool forged into a thing of beauty. As the procession reaches the hill, the king and his chief lords ascend to the highest tier, but it is the law speaker who commands the next moment. He takes a position on the tier just below the king, turning to face the assembled thousands. The cynical traitor next to you whispers, "Now watch." He is more than just a reciter. This touches on a subtle but crucial debate. Historians still argue whether the law speaker was merely a reciter of established tradition or an active interpreter who could shape the law through his choice of words and emphasis. He holds the power of precedent. When a new, tricky case arises, the king will turn to him and ask, "What does the law say?" His answer, drawn from that vast mental library, can determine the fate of a man or the outcome of a major dispute. A slight change in wording, the subtle elevation of one precedent over another, the convenient forgetting of a clause. Through these methods, a clever law speaker could actively guide the evolution of the law without ever appearing to create it. He is not just a hard drive. He is the operating system, running the program and, when necessary, debugging it on the fly. A deep silence falls over the entire thing field. The wind itself seems to hold its breath. The law speaker plants his staff firmly on the turf, takes a deep breath, and opens his mouth. The first words of the law echo across the plain, his voice clear and strong, honed by years of practice. It is a voice that carries not just words, but the weight of generations, the distilled wisdom and will of a people. For the next hour, there will be no other sound but this single voice, weaving the verbal tapestry of justice and order for all to hear. You are listening to the very bedrock of this Norse society being laid bare. The law speaker's voice falls silent. The last word of the recited law hangs in the air for a moment before being carried away by the wind. A collective exhale seems to pass through the crowd. The annual reminder of the rules is complete. Now begins the process of reaffirming the bonds that hold the kingdom together. A man in the robes of a Godi, a local chieftain who also serves as a priest, steps forward from the side of the chapel. He carries a heavy, dark object, with a reverence usually reserved for a sleeping child or a dangerous weapon. As he ascends the tiers of the hill, you see what it is. A massive arm ring, too large for any normal man to wear. It is a perfect unbroken circle of what looks like dark iron or steel, thick as your thumb and polished smooth by the touch of countless hands over countless years. This is the oath ring, the Baugur. It is one of the most sacred objects in the kingdom. For most of the year, it resides in a temple or a chieftain's hall, resting on an altar where it might be spattered with the blood of sacrifices to consecrate it further. But today, it is brought out into the sun, into the sight of all the people, to serve its primary function. In your world of written contracts, digital signatures, and legions of lawyers, it is hard to grasp the sheer terrifying power of this simple metal circle. In this society, a man's word is the foundation of his worth, and an oath is that word made sacred, witnessed by gods and men. Oaths are the invisible threads that weave the entire social fabric. They bind a warrior to his lord, a husband to his wife, a traitor to his partner, and a witness to the truth. Without the power of the oath, there is no trust. And without trust, there is only chaos. The king's most powerful vassal, a fierce-looking chieftain from the Hebrides, is the first to step forward. He approaches the Godi, who holds the ring steady. The chieftain reaches out and lays his hand flat upon the cold, heavy metal. The silence on the plain is now absolute. Every person strains to hear. The chieftain's voice rings out, strong and clear, speaking a formula that is ancient and unchangeable. I swear by Frey and by Thor and the almighty Odin, he booms, that I will be true and loyal to my king, to hold all that he holds, and shun all that he shuns. His hand rests on the ring as he speaks, as if the object itself is absorbing the promise, recording it in its very molecular structure. He is not just making a political promise, he is entering into a magical compact with the most powerful forces in the cosmos as his witnesses and guarantors. You stare at the ring, mesmerized by its stark simplicity and immense significance. It is clearly an object of power, but what kind? Historians still argue whether the rings used in these ceremonies were always made of precious metals like silver, symbolizing wealth and lordship, or if simpler iron rings were more common, symbolizing the unbreakability of the oath itself. This one appears to be iron, speaking not of worldly wealth but of strength, permanence, and the grim finality of a sworn promise. To break an oath sworn on this ring would be unthinkable. It would be worse than a crime. It would be a complete erasure of your honor, your very identity as a trustworthy member of the community. You would become an oath breaker, a nuddinger, a word of profound contempt. No one would trade with you, fight with you, or trust you ever again. Your life, for all intents and purposes, would be over. But the consequences, as the old woman next to you whispers, are not merely social. She tells you that the gods, invoked by name, do not take being summoned to witness a lie lightly. A man who speaks a falsehood while touching the ring will find his crops withering in the field, his cattle falling sick, and his ships lost at sea. It is said that the ring itself can sense a lie, feeling burning hot to the hand of a perjurer, or that the words of a false oath will turn to ash in the speaker's mouth. These beliefs are the enforcement mechanism. It's the ultimate security system, combining public shaming with a healthy dose of religious terror. It's like clicking, I have read and agreed to the terms and conditions today, except the user agreement is with the gods, and the penalty for violation isn't just getting your account suspended, but having your boat struck by lightning. One by one, other men are called forward. Not just chieftains swearing fealty, but men acting as witnesses in legal disputes that have been brought before the thing. They too place their hand on the ring and swear to speak only the truth. Their testimony, sanctified by this act, will be taken as fact. You watch, spellbound, realizing you are witnessing the very glue of this society being applied. The laws recited by the law speaker provide the structure, the skeleton of order, but it is these oaths, sworn on this sacred circle of steel, that provide the sinews and muscle, binding it all together and giving it strength. The entire system is built on a shared belief in the power of a spoken word, a public promise, and the ever-present watchful eyes of the gods. As the last oath is sworn and the king and his inner circle withdraw to the chapel for their own private council, a visible change sweeps across the vast assembly field. The stiff, formal posture of the crowd dissolves. The collective tension held for hours is released in a great wave of sound and motion. The solemn court of law transforms almost instantly into a sprawling, chaotic, and joyous summer festival. The air, which a moment ago carried only the grave words of law and fealty, now fills with the thick, savory smoke of roasting meat, the high-pitched squeal of a bone flute, and the booming laughter of friends who haven't seen each other since the last assembly. You wander away from the now quiet hill and plunge into the heart of the fair. It's a sensory overload. Makeshift stalls have been erected everywhere, laden with goods that tell the story of the island's economy. You see a farmer from the fertile southern plains standing proudly beside barrels of salted butter and wheels of hard cheese, essential provisions for any sea voyage. A fisherman from the west coast town of Peel has strings of silver herring, dried until they are stiff as boards, their salty smell sharp and clean. There are women selling balls of brightly colored yarn, dyed with local gorse, heather, and lichen, the colors of the island itself spun into thread. And amidst it all, you find traders hawking more exotic wares, fine linen from the Irish towns, lumps of amber from the Baltic, and even a few pieces of well-crafted English pottery. This vibrant market is not an afterthought. It's a core function of the assembly. For the hundreds of families living in isolated farmsteads scattered across the island, this is their one great chance each year to connect with the wider world. This is the mainstream fact of life for all such assemblies in the Norse world. The thing was the social and economic glue for a dispersed population. It was their annual convention, their shopping mall, and their news agency all in one. You could buy a new axe head, sell your surplus wool, and hear the latest news from the settlements in Iceland, all within a few hundred paces. As you navigate the throng, you realize that the most important trading isn't in goods, but in people's futures. You see a wealthy farmer in deep, quiet conversation with another. Between them stands the farmer's daughter, her eyes fixed on the ground, and the other man's son looking equally uncomfortable. You are witnessing the final negotiations of an arranged marriage, a strategic alliance designed to merge two powerful families, their lands, and their flocks. The couple's feelings are a secondary concern, if they are a concern at all. A few yards away, a chieftain's lieutenant is talking to a group of brawny young men, his words quiet but his hands expressive. He's not buying cheese. He's recruiting for the summer's voyages. It's a job interview, Viking style, where the primary qualification is being good with an axe. It's a reminder that this festival is also a marketplace for ambition and manpower. You sit for a moment watching this swirling microcosm of Manx society, and you ponder a question. What really brought everyone here? The law or the life? Historians still argue whether the formal legal assembly or the informal economic and social gathering was the primary driver for attendance for the average person. Did that farmer with the marriageable daughter drag his family halfway across the island to hear the law speaker? Or was his real purpose to secure a powerful son-in-law? For the elite, the thing was clearly about power and governance. But for the common folk, perhaps the law was just the formal excuse for the annual reunion, the vital social and commercial event they couldn't afford to miss. A man offers you a drink from a carved wooden cup. It's a cloudy, potent ale, and you accept with a nod of thanks. He is a craftsman who has just agreed to make a new rudder for a trader's ship, and they are sealing the deal. They don't sign a contract. They look each other in the eye, state the terms, and drink together. This is a form of ale friendship, a bond sealed by the shared act of drinking. In a world of spoken words, this public act is as binding as any oath for everyday business. It's a quirky and intensely practical tradition. After all, it's hard to cheat someone you've shared a drink with in front of all your peers. As the sun begins to dip towards the horizon, the fires burn brighter and the music grows louder. The day of solemn law has fully given way to a night of riotous celebration, the two halves of a whole, each essential for the health of the kingdom. The morning after the great festival dawns with a quiet solemnity. The sounds of music and raucous laughter have been replaced by a low, expectant murmur from the thousands who are once again gathering. The debris of the feast has been cleared, and the mood has shifted from celebratory back to ceremonial. Today, the assembly will perform one of its most ancient and significant rituals, the formal procession from the place of council to the place of proclamation. You find a position along the wide, straight path that connects the stone chapel of St. John to the base of Tynwald Hill. This is the spine of the entire assembly, the conduit through which power and law will flow. You notice that the path itself has been prepared. Overnight, servants have strewn it with a thick carpet of freshly cut green rushes and wildflowers. The air is fragrant with the scent of crushed herbs. This tradition, rooted deep in the Celtic past of the island, is a sign of immense respect. turning a simple track of earth into a sacred way. It honors the ground upon which the law will travel. It's the original red carpet, though considerably better for the environment and much more pleasant smelling. Standing here, you feel you are not just waiting for a parade. You are lining a route that has been walked for this same purpose for generations, a tangible link to the very first thing held on this field. A hush falls as the heavy wooden doors of the chapel swing open. The king and his council have concluded their deliberations. The decisions made within the Christian confines of the chapel must now be brought out into the open air to be proclaimed to all from the ancient, pagan-feeling hill. The procession emerges, and it is a masterclass in political symbolism. At its very head walks a single imposing warrior. He is not the king, but he carries the ultimate symbol of the king's power. It is a massive, two-handed sword, held upright in front of him, its polished steel gleaming even in the soft, overcast light. This is the sword of state, the physical embodiment of royal authority and justice. Its hilt is bound in silver wire, and its heavy pommel provides the balance needed to wield such a weapon. It is not a battlefield sword, it is a justice sword, a symbol of the king's duty to protect the peace and his right to dispense the highest punishment. As this magnificent blade passes by, you can feel its presence. It seems to hum with a latent power, and the crowd shrinks back slightly as if from a source of heat. It is both a promise and a threat. It promises that the king will uphold the law for all, but it threatens swift, sharp punishment for those who would defy it. Its symbolic role is clear, yet there are deeper beliefs at play. Historians still argue whether the primary role of the sword in the procession was as a symbol of temporal justice or as a sacral object with its own inherent power to ward off evil. To many here, that sword is not just steel and silver. It is a holy relic, magically cleansing the path before the king, warding off any unseen spirits or ill will that might disrupt the sanctity of the law-giving. Behind the sword-bearer walks the king, his expression stern and impassive. Following him is the law speaker, the living law, and then the island's great chieftains and lords, walking in a precise, unspoken order of precedence. Their place in this line is a public declaration of their status in the kingdom. To be moved forward in the line is a sign of royal favor. To be shifted back is a public rebuke. You can imagine the intense political maneuvering that must have gone on behind the chapel doors to secure a favorable position. It's a walking, talking diagram of the island's power structure, and probably more stressful for its participants than any modern corporate team-building exercise. The procession moves with a slow, rhythmic pace, the only sounds being the soft tread of feet on the rushes and the faint jingle of metal ornaments on the lords' cloaks. The crowd is utterly silent, their heads bowed in respect as the king and the sword pass. This is the theater of power at its most effective, a display designed to inspire awe and reinforce the established order without a single word being spoken. The procession finally reaches the base of Tynwald Hill. The sword-bearer takes his place at the foot of the processional way, the sword still held rigidly upright. The king and his retinue ascend the 4 tiers, each man moving to his designated spot on the grassy slopes. The journey is complete. The law, decided in private, has been brought forth and is now ready to be delivered to the public, from the top of the very hill that is made from the soil of their homes. Everyone is in their place upon the hill. The king is seated on the highest tier, a silent, watchful presence. The sword of state is a gleaming line of steel at the foot of the mound. The ceremonial aspects are complete. Now, the practical business of justice begins. The law speaker steps forward, and this time he does not begin a long recitation. He calls out 2 names, and 2 men, middling farmers by the look of their rough homespun clothes, are brought before the hill. A case is being presented for judgment. The law speaker lays out the facts with methodical precision. The son of the second farmer, in a fit of youthful recklessness, killed the prize ox of the first farmer. The evidence has been heard, witnesses have sworn their oaths on the sacred ring, and guilt has been established. Now comes the question that defines this entire legal system. What happens next? In your world, the answer might involve community service, a fine paid to the state, or maybe even a short stint in a local jail for property destruction. But you look around and realize the profound limitations of this era. There are no jails. A jailhouse is an expensive, permanent structure that requires guards, food, and administration. This society is far too decentralized and mobile for such a thing. Vengeance is an option, of course. The aggrieved farmer could demand a life for a life, or in this case, a son for an ox. But that would only spark a blood feud that could poison the community for generations, weakening everyone. So what is the solution? The answer is as pragmatic as it is profound. Justice here is not about punishment, but about restoration. It's not about making the criminal suffer. It's about making the victim whole. The law speaker, his voice resonating with the authority of established law, declares the judgment. The family of the boy who killed the ox must pay the owner a compensation fee of 3 silver marks, the agreed-upon value of a prime working animal. The goal is to restore the balance, to put things back as they were. The farmer has lost an ox. Now he has the means to buy a new one. The community is spared a blood feud, and the guilty party has made amends through payment. This is the core principle of Norse justice, a system based almost entirely on fines and compensation. This concept extends to the most serious crime of all, the killing of a person. This is the origin of the famous legal concept of vergild, or literally, man price. Every free person in this society has a price on their head, a specific monetary value that must be paid to their kin if they are slain. This isn't a fine paid to the king. It's a direct payment to the family of the deceased to compensate for their loss and, crucially, to buy off their right to a blood feud. Accepting the wergild is a binding legal act that ends the conflict. To take the money and then seek revenge would be the height of dishonor. Of course, not all men are created equal in the eyes of this law. The wergild for a powerful chieftain is astronomically high, an amount that could bankrupt a lesser family. The price for a simple free farmer like the men before you is much lower. A slave has no wergild at all. Killing a slave is simply destruction of property, and the compensation is paid to the slave's owner, not their family. The law is a mirror, reflecting and reinforcing the rigid social hierarchy of the kingdom. It's a bit of a grim thought, knowing your life has a specific legally defined monetary value. The level of detail in this system is astonishing. It's not just for murder. The law codes, all held in the law speaker's memory, contain a dizzyingly specific list of fines for every imaginable injury. The old warrior next to you murmurs some examples. Lose a front tooth, that's a half mark of silver. An ear, 3 marks. Sever the thumb from a man's sword hand, and the price is nearly that of killing him outright, for you have taken his ability to fight and work. Even insults have a price. Publicly questioning a man's courage or honor could result in a fine greater than that for a broken arm. It shows what this society truly values, not just life and limb, but reputation and honor. You watch as the 2 farmers formally accept the judgment. The payment is agreed and the dispute is settled. The system, for all its strangeness, works. But what is its ultimate purpose? Historians still argue whether this system was primarily about preventing blood feuds by providing a peaceful alternative, or if it was also a way for the elite to generate revenue and reinforce social hierarchy. When a large wergild was paid, a portion of it often went to the king or the local chieftain for their role in arbitrating the peace. Was it a public service or a protection racket? The answer is probably both. It was a brilliant social innovation to maintain peace, which also happened to be quite profitable for those in charge. And if a family refused or was unable to pay the fine, the consequence was absolute. They were declared outlaws, cast out from the protection of the law entirely. That terrifying threat is what made the whole system stick. The case of the farmer and his ox is concluded. The 2 men, now bound by the law's judgment, bow towards the hill and retreat back into the anonymity of the crowd. For a moment, there is a pause in the proceedings, a lull in the great machine of the assembly. During this pause, all eyes drift upwards, past the tiers of chieftains and headmen, to the single figure seated at the very summit of Tynwald Hill. Here sits the King of Man and the Isles. He is not seated on an elaborate golden throne, but on a simple, sturdy chair of dark carved wood, perhaps with a single stone slab at his feet. Yet there is no mistaking his authority. It radiates from him, a palpable force that commands the attention of the entire gathering. You study him. He is not a soft, sheltered monarch. He is a warlord, first and foremost. His face is weathered by sea wind and sun, and a faint white scar cuts through one eyebrow, a permanent reminder of a past battle. His tunic is made of fine, dark wool, but it is the cloak clasped at his shoulder that truly marks his status. It is dyed a deep, rich purple, a color so expensive to produce that it's worth more than a small farm. It is a calculated display of wealth and power. He is the leader of this kingdom of sea lanes and islands, and his primary job is to be strong enough to hold it. His power, however, is not absolute. He is not a divine right king who rules by the will of the heavens. He is what historians would call a primus inter pares, a first among equals. The powerful, ambitious chieftains sitting on the tiers below him are not his subjects in the way you might understand it. They are his vassals, his followers, his allies. Their loyalty is a currency he must constantly earn. His authority rests on a simple, brutal contract. He must lead them to victory in battle, and more importantly, to wealth. A successful king is one who brings home plunder, silver, weapons, slaves, from raids on the richer lands across the sea. An unsuccessful king, one who leads his men to defeat or brings them home empty-handed, will not be king for long. You see a demonstration of this principle right before your eyes. The king catches the eye of one of the Hebridean chieftains who swore an oath of fealty earlier. With a slight nod, the king unclasps a thick, twisted silver arm ring from his own wrist. With a practiced flick, he tosses it down to the chieftain, who catches it expertly. A murmur of approval runs through the crowd. You have just witnessed one of the most fundamental duties of a Norse king, the act of ring-giving. Kings in the sagas and poems are often given the title ring giver. This is not just poetic fancy, it is a literal job description. Generosity was not a virtue, it was a political necessity. By publicly gifting treasure to his followers, the king bound them to him, rewarding their loyalty and incentivizing others to serve him well. It was a performance bonus, paid in precious metal, and it was far more effective than any written contract of employment. This delicate relationship between the king and his powerful followers is the central drama of the kingdom. You can see it in the way the chieftains watch him, with respect, yes, but also with the calculating eyes of rivals. Every single one of them, in his heart, likely believes he could do the job just as well. The king knows this. His reign is a constant performance, a balancing act of projecting strength, dispensing patronage, and subtly putting down any potential challengers before they can grow too powerful. Tynwald, for him, is the most important event of the year. It's where he can look all his ambitious followers in the eye at once and remind them who is in charge. This precarious state of affairs naturally leads to a messy and often violent question of succession. How does one become king? Historians still argue whether the succession of kingship was determined by a formal system of inheritance like primogeniture, or if it was simply a case of the strongest and most charismatic claimant seizing power upon the previous king's death. For a sea kingdom like this, built on the charisma of warrior leaders, the latter was often the case. When the old king died, it frequently triggered a bloody free for all among his sons, brothers, and most powerful chieftains, a violent election where the votes were cast with swords. The man who sat on that chair today was likely the victor of just such a struggle. The king raises a hand, and the murmuring on the plain ceases instantly. He is about to speak, to give his assent to a new law or pass judgment in a final appeal. His voice is not the trained, resonant boom of the law speaker, but it has a rough, gravelly quality of command that brooks no argument. You look at him, the victorious warlord, the generous ring giver, the precarious pinnacle of this pyramid of power, and you understand. The law may have been spoken by the law speaker, but its ultimate authority, its enforcement, flows from the will of this one man on the high tier. The king sits back down, his judgment rendered. The business of the assembly continues, and another case is brought forward. But this one is different. It's not a straightforward matter of a stolen pig or a broken fence. It's a complex maritime dispute involving salvage rights from a shipwreck, a situation with multiple claimants and no clear, simple precedent. It's a legal gray area. As the arguments are laid out, a silence falls over the hill. All eyes, including the king's, turn to one man. the law speaker. It is his duty to delve into the vast archive of his mind and produce the relevant legal principle, the ancestral ruling that will provide the framework for a just decision. He stands, his brow furrowed in concentration. He begins to speak, but then he falters. He closes his eyes, searching. The silence stretches, becoming uncomfortable. A low, anxious murmur begins to spread through the crowd. You are witnessing the unthinkable, the ultimate nightmare of a pre-literate legal system. The law speaker is forgetting, or at the very least he is uncertain. That perfect, infallible memory, the bedrock upon which the entire kingdom's justice is built, has just shown a crack. It's a moment of profound crisis. This is not like a lawyer asking for a recess to check a law book. There are no law books. There is only this man's mind. A failure of his memory is a failure of the law itself. It creates a vacuum, and a vacuum is a dangerous thing in a society of ambitious, armed men. So what happens now? Does the system simply crash? No. The Norse, for all their reliance on a single individual, were not fools. They had a backup system, a form of distributed memory. The law speaker turns from the king and looks down towards the lower tiers of the hill, where the respected elders and headmen of the parishes are seated. He calls upon 3 of the oldest among them, men with snow-white beards who have attended this thing for more than 50 summers. They are the living repositories of the law's public performance. While none of them knows the entire code, they have heard it recited year after year, and their collective memory is a formidable resource. They are, in effect, the system's backup hard drives. These 3 elders confer, their heads close together, their voices a low, rumbling debate. This is the quirky, human-centered failsafe of the system. The law is not just what the law speaker remembers, but what the community of wise men collectively attests to. One elder says he recalls a precedent about flotsam and jetsam from a case 20 years ago. The second disagrees, arguing that the ruling was different and involved a foreign merchant. The third closes his eyes and begins to quietly chant a few lines of alliterative legal verse that seems to touch upon the matter. They are not just recalling facts, they are reconstructing the law from its remembered fragments, right here in the open. Of course, this process is fraught with peril and opens the door to manipulation. Is the law speaker's memory lapse genuine, or is it a clever political maneuver? Historians still argue whether a law speaker's lapse in memory could have been a convenient political tool, allowing him to forget an inconvenient law or precedent that a powerful figure wanted to ignore. By claiming uncertainty and throwing the question to the elders, he could potentially guide the outcome towards a desired conclusion, all while appearing to be a humble servant of tradition. I don't recall, you realize, with a jolt of modern cynicism, has been a powerful political phrase for a very, very long time. This inherent fragility, this reliance on fallible human memory, is the very reason that Norse societies that survived and evolved eventually took the monumental step of writing their laws down. Across the sea in Iceland, their famous law code, the Gragas or Grey Goose Laws, was finally committed to vellum around the year 1117. It was a tacit admission that the old way, for all its tradition and poetic grandeur, was too vulnerable. The act of writing the law down was a technological revolution, freezing it, standardizing it, and removing it from the sole possession of a single forgetful mind. Here on Tynwald Hill, however, that day is still in the future. The 3 elders have reached a consensus. They announce their collective memory of the precedent. The law speaker listens, nods slowly, and the lines of concentration on his face relax. "It is as they say," he declares, his voice once again firm. The law is remembered. He then turns to the king and explains the now clarified legal principle. The crisis is over. The system has been rebooted. But everyone in the assembly, from the king to the lowliest farmer, has been reminded of the terrifying fragility of their world. A world where the entire structure of society is held together by a web of memory as strong and as vulnerable as the mind of a single man. The brief but palpable tension of the law speaker's memory lapse has passed. The ancient laws have been reaffirmed. Now the assembly shifts from the past to the future, from the recitation of old laws to the creation of new ones. A society, after all, is not a static thing. New challenges arise, new solutions are needed. The king, having conferred with his chieftains in the privacy of the chapel, now signals that a new edict is to be proclaimed. This is a pivotal moment. You are about to witness the law evolve in real time. A man, one of the king's trusted advisors, steps forward holding a small smoothed piece of wood covered in a series of notches and runes. This is not the law itself, but a mnemonic device, a physical reminder of the key points of the new decree that was hammered out by the elite. The law-making process itself was not democratic. There was no grand debate amongst the common folk. It was a decision made by the powerful for the powerful, behind the closed doors of the chapel. But for that law to have any legitimacy, for it to be accepted and obeyed, it must be brought out into the light and announced publicly to all. The king's advisor hands the inscribed wood to an official, a forerunner of the figures who would later be called deemsters on the island. This man clears his throat, and in the clear authoritative tones of the ruling class, he reads the new law in Old Norse. Let's imagine it's a practical, if unpopular, piece of legislation. By the will of the king and this council, a tax of 1/10 part shall be taken from all silver brought for trade into the port of Peel, the funds to be used for the upkeep of the king's ships and the defense of the Isles. The Norse-speaking warriors and traders in the crowd nod their understanding. They may not like it, no one likes a new tax, but they understand it. It is the price of a strong king and a secure kingdom. But then something remarkable happens. After the proclamation in Norse is finished, another man steps forward. He is not Norse. He is a Manx Gael, an elder of the native population, his face and clothes marking him as distinct from the ruling Vikings. He takes his place, and in the flowing, musical cadences of Manx Gaelic, he repeats the new law, word for word, for the benefit of the island's original inhabitants who are gathered. This is a moment of profound significance. It is a public acknowledgement that this island is a hybrid, a place of two peoples, two languages. This bilingual proclamation is a tradition that speaks volumes about the reality of the Norse settlement. They are the military and political masters, but the Gaelic-speaking farmers are the backbone of the island's economy. To govern effectively, you must speak the language of the governed. Of course, the motives behind this act are complex. Historians still argue whether the reading in Manx Gaelic was a genuine act of inclusion for the native population, or a pragmatic necessity to ensure compliance from a populace that was not yet fully Norse-speaking. Was it a gesture of respect, an early form of multicultural policy, or was it simply good business? A farmer cannot pay a tax if he doesn't understand that the tax exists. The truth is likely a mix of both. It is a practical accommodation that, over time, helps to weave the two cultures together, creating a unique Manx-Norse identity. After the law has been announced in both tongues, ensuring every soul present understands its meaning, one final crucial step remains. The law must be formally accepted by the community. The official who read the law cries out, "Do you take this law?" This is the moment of lagtaka, or law-taking, and the response is not a quiet show of hands. The chieftains and their armed warriors, the men whose power underpins the king's rule, give their answer. They raise their swords and bang the flat of the blade or the heavy pommel against their round shields. A wave of rhythmic metallic clanging, a sound like 100 hammers striking 100 anvils, rolls across the plain. It is a visceral, intimidating sound, the sound of the armed and powerful giving their collective and very public consent. It is the most aggressive, I agree, to the terms of service in human history. With that intimidating clang, the law is made. It is now active, official, and binding. It has been added to the body of tradition that the law speaker must now commit to his own memory, to be recited and revered in all the years to come. You have just seen the entire legislative process, from the elite council to the bilingual proclamation to the armed consent. It is a system that blends autocratic decision-making with a necessary performance of public inclusion and acceptance. The law, you realize, isn't just an idea. It has to be made real through voice, translation, and the ringing of steel on wood. The intimidating clang of swords on shields, the sound of the elite consenting to their own decree, fades away. The new law on silver tariffs is now the law of the land. Now, your perspective shifts. You move away from the direct view of the hill's summit and immerse yourself in the great throng of people standing on the field. You are no longer an observer of the powerful. You are now one of the common folk, the hundreds of free farmers, fishermen, and craftsmen who must live and die by these rules. The air down here is different. It's thick with the smells of damp wool, oiled leather, and the peaty soil trampled under 1,000 feet, and it is filled with the sound of murmuring. This is the sound of the law being received, digested, and debated in real time. A grizzled farmer to your left grumbles to his neighbor, "Another tax? Does the king think silver grows on trees?" His friend, a more pragmatic man, shrugs. His ships keep the Scottish raiders away from our coasts. Ships need timber and tar. Nothing is free. A fisherman chimes in. This will mean the merchants from Dublin will offer us less for our salted herring to cover their costs. This isn't a debate about grand legal theory. This is kitchen table economics happening right here on the field. The decisions made on high are not abstract principles to these people. They are calculations that will affect the amount of food on their tables for the coming year. You begin to understand that for these people, Tynwald is not just a place to hear the law, but a place to seek it. That same grizzled farmer has a grievance. His upstream neighbor has built a new channel from the local stream to water his own fields, leaving the farmer's land parched and his crops failing. What can he do? He is not a chieftain. He cannot simply walk up the tiers of the hill and demand a hearing from the king. His access to justice, you learn, is indirect. This is a core truth of the thing for the common man. To have your voice heard, you need a powerful sponsor. He must go to the headman of his parish or to the chieftain to whom he owes service. He will present his case, perhaps with a small gift, a wheel of his wife's best cheese or a promise of a season's labor. If the chieftain believes the case has merit, or if he simply dislikes the other farmer, he will agree to become the man's patron, his champion. It is the chieftain who will then bring the case before the thing, using his own status and voice to speak for his client. So while the farmer has a path to justice, it is a borrowed one, dependent on the patronage of his social superiors. This system weaves a web of mutual obligation, tying the small farmer to his lord in a relationship that is part legal, part feudal. But what if the people are deeply unhappy with a new law? What if they feel a judgment is unjust? Do they have any power then? You get your answer when another, more controversial edict is proclaimed. Perhaps a new rule about military service. This time, the clang of assent from the chieftain's shields is weaker, more hesitant, and from the crowd there is no respectful silence. A low groan rises from 1,000 throats. Men don't just mutter, they speak loudly, angrily. They grip their axes and spears not to raise them in threat but as a sign of their displeasure. This is the power of the murmur. A single heckler can be ignored, but the collective angry roar of the armed freemen, the very men who must fight the king's battles, is a political force that no ruler can afford to disregard. It is a veto, spoken not in formal debate, but in a wave of popular discontent. The king and his council on the hill see this, they hear it, and they know that a law with no popular support is just words on the wind. This brings you to the heart of a complex question. Historians still argue about the true extent of a common freeman's agency at the thing. Was he a genuine participant in the legal process, or merely a spectator to the judgments of his social superiors? Standing here in the midst of the grumbling, hopeful, anxious crowd, you realize the answer is not simple. The freeman is not a legislator. His power is not direct, yet he is far from a passive observer. His collective voice can shape the boundaries of the law, and his need for justice, channeled through a patron, is one of the primary reasons the assembly exists at all. He is both subject to the law and, in his own way, its ultimate foundation. The whole grand structure on the hill, with its king and law speaker and chieftains, is built on his tacit consent, on his willingness to show up, to listen, and to obey. Awaiting continute. The day wears on and the assembly works its way through the island's legal troubles. But then a case is brought forward that silences the crowd. It is not a dispute over land or a new tax. It is a direct accusation of a crime that strikes at the heart of the community's trust. A merchant, his face a mask of fury, accuses his neighbor, a quiet farmer, of entering his home while he was away and stealing a heavy silver brooch. a family heirloom. The farmer stands before the hill, his expression one of shocked denial. There are no witnesses. The brooch is nowhere to be found. It is one man's word against another's. The legal machine grinds to a halt. The usual methods have failed. Both men, the accuser and the accused, are willing to swear the most sacred oaths on the great iron ring. The merchant will swear he saw the farmer near his home and that the brooch is gone. The farmer will swear he was in his own fields all day and has never seen the brooch. Their oaths will cancel each other out, two irresistible forces meeting an immovable object. The law speaker cannot look into their souls to find the truth. The king cannot simply choose one man to believe over the other without being accused of favoritism. The human system of law, based on evidence, testimony, and oaths, has reached its absolute limit. In these desperate moments, the Norse turn to a higher court of appeal, the gods. When the judgment of men is insufficient, the judgment of the divine is sought. This is the cold, stark logic of trial by ordeal. It is a terrifying admission of human fallibility and a profound act of faith. The accused farmer is given a choice. He can submit his fate to the ordeal, or he can choose trial by combat, a ritualized duel known as a holmgang, to settle the matter with steel. As a farmer, not a seasoned warrior, he chooses the ordeal. Specifically, the ordeal of hot iron. A space is cleared near the hill. The Godi, the priest chieftain, builds a fire, chanting as he lays the wood. The mood on the plain has become deathly quiet, the festive air of the fair a distant memory. This is a grim and sacred business. The Godi places a short, thick bar of iron into the heart of the roaring fire until it glows a malevolent, pulsing red. The logic of the ordeal is simple and, in its own way, terrifyingly rational. It is believed that the gods will not allow an innocent man to be harmed by the sacred elements. They will intervene, performing a miracle to protect the truthful and expose the liar. The accused farmer is brought forward. His face is pale, his hands trembling, but his jaw is set. The priest recites the charge and asks the gods to make the truth known. The farmer must then walk 9 paces, the length of 3 spear shafts, holding the glowing bar of iron in his bare hand. You can feel the searing heat of it even from where you stand. The smell of scorched cloth, and then the sickening, sweet smell of searing flesh fills the air. The farmer doesn't scream, but a strangled cry of agony escapes his lips as he completes the 9 paces and drops the iron bar, which hisses on the damp turf. His ordeal is not yet over. The Godi immediately takes the burned hand and binds it in clean linen, sealing the bandage with wax stamped with the chieftain's seal. No one may touch it for 3 days. Herein lies the final judgment. After 3 days, the bandage will be removed in front of the king's representatives. If the wound is clean and healing, showing signs of what they would see as divine intervention, he is declared innocent. The gods have protected him. But if the wound is festering, infected, and putrid, he is guilty. The gods have abandoned him to the earthly consequences of his crime and his false oath. You watch this brutal ritual and wonder about its true purpose. Historians still argue whether these ordeals were seen as a direct appeal to divine judgment or as a form of psychological coercion designed to terrify a guilty party into confessing. The thinking goes that a guilty man, knowing with absolute certainty that the gods would offer no protection, would break down and confess his crime rather than face the guaranteed agony and subsequent condemnation. The ordeal in this view wasn't a trial. It was the ultimate terrifying lie detector test. For matters of honor, especially between warriors, the alternative was the holmgang. It was not a chaotic brawl, but a duel with strict, quirky rules. It was fought on a staked-out hide or cloak, from which a combatant could not retreat. Each man was allowed a set number of shields, and the first to draw blood was often declared the winner. It was a way to channel the warrior ethos into the legal system, settling a dispute with controlled, non-fatal violence. But for the farmer, the iron was the only path. His hand is bound, his fate sealed for the next 3 days. You realize you have just witnessed a system pushed to its breaking point, a moment where law gives way to magic, and justice is placed in the unpredictable hands of faith, fire, and biology. The grim spectacle of the ordeal of iron leaves a chill in the air. The crowd, which had been deathly silent, begins to murmur again, the tension slowly easing. As the assembly moves on to other, more mundane matters, your gaze wanders through the throng. You start to notice the women. They are everywhere, standing beside their husbands, fathers, and brothers. They are not a homogeneous group. There are the wives of powerful chieftains, their cloaks pinned with fine silver brooches, and there are tenant farmers' daughters, their hands calloused from work, their faces weathered by the sun. At first, you might have seen them as mere background characters in this masculine drama of law and power, but you look closer, and you see that they are listening with an intensity that matches any man's. And you realize, the law being spoken from that hill is not just for men. It governs their lives too, in ways that are both surprisingly progressive and strictly limited. In a world dominated by bearded warriors and governed by assemblies where only men could speak, it would be easy to assume that women were little more than property. But the reality of Manx Norse law is far more complex. You notice a proud, confident-looking woman, the wife of a prosperous landowner, directing her sons with a quiet word. Dangling from the belt at her waist is a large ring holding a collection of bronze and iron keys. This is no mere decoration. She is the husfreyja, the mistress of the household, and those keys are her symbol of office. They unlock the heavy wooden chests that hold the family's linen, valuables, and, most importantly, the locked pantry and storehouses that contain the food. She holds the keys to the family's survival. In a world of subsistence farming and long winters, this makes her the chief operating officer of the most important economic unit there is, the family farm. This domestic authority is backed up by significant legal rights concerning property. This is one of the most remarkable aspects of Norse law compared to other European societies of the time. While a daughter would typically inherit only half the share of a son, the crucial fact is that she did inherit. The property she brought into a marriage as a dowry, along with anything she inherited later, remained legally hers. Her husband could administer it and use the profits from it, but he could not sell her ancestral land or spend her inheritance without her explicit consent. This gave a free woman a measure of economic independence and security that was almost unheard of elsewhere. She was not just a part of the family, she was a shareholder with a legally protected stake. Even more startling to a modern observer is a woman's right to initiate divorce. The process was surprisingly straightforward. If a husband struck his wife in front of witnesses, failed to provide for the family, or even shamed her publicly, she had grounds to end the marriage. To do so, she would gather her own witnesses, stand at the main door of their longhouse, and publicly declare herself divorced from him. It was a formal legal sundering of the union, and upon that declaration, she was entitled to take back her original dowry and all her personal property, allowing her to return to her own kin not as a destitute burden, but as a woman with means. You could joke that it was a system with far less paperwork than modern divorce, though probably a great deal more yelling. But what was the real motivation behind these rights? Was this a society of proto-feminists? Historians still argue whether these rights represented a form of genuine female empowerment, or were simply pragmatic measures designed to protect family property and ensure social stability in a society where men were often away raiding or trading. If a man was gone for years at sea, his wife needed the legal authority to run the farm. If a marriage failed, it was better for the whole community if the woman and her children were provided for by her own property, rather than becoming a drain on the resources of her birth family. These laws may have been less about an abstract ideal of women's rights and more about a practical obsession with maintaining social order and preserving family wealth across generations. And for all these progressive-seeming rights, the limitations were stark and absolute. A woman had no public voice. She could not speak at the thing, inherit a title, become a chieftain, or serve as a law speaker. Her legal identity was almost always represented by a man. Her father before marriage, her husband after, and her son if she was widowed. Most marriages, especially among the powerful, were arranged for political and economic advantage, with her own feelings being a minor consideration. Her power, though real, was confined to the domestic sphere. The keys at her belt gave her command of the longhouse, but they could not unlock the door to the world of public power, the world of the men gathered on Tynwald Hill. You look at the women in the crowd again, seeing them now in a new light. Not as powerless, but as wielding a different, more subtle kind of power, fiercely protected by the law within the high, strong walls of their own domain. You drift away from the knot of people discussing the women's law, your attention drawn back to the vibrant, chaotic energy of the Tynwald Fair. Having seen the law in action, you now start to look closer at the engine that drives this gathering: commerce. You watch a farmer haggle with a blacksmith over a new, well-made axe head. An agreement is reached and the farmer grins, but he doesn't reach for a coin purse. Instead, his son hefts a large, tightly bound roll of dark, coarse woolen cloth and hands it to the smith, who inspects it carefully before nodding his approval. You have just witnessed a transaction made not with money, but with a legally recognized commodity. Welcome to the complex and fascinating economy of the Viking Age, a world that runs on a dual system of barter and bullion. That woolen cloth, you learn, is known as vadmal. For centuries in many parts of the Norse world, it was a standardized unit of value, a form of currency woven on a loom. The law code specified the required quality, width, and length for a piece of vadmal to be considered legal tender. You could pay taxes, settle debts, and pay legal fines in rolls of this cloth. Other goods, like barrels of butter or measures of grain, also served as this kind of commodity currency. It's a practical system for a largely agricultural society, but one that comes with its own challenges. You can imagine that carrying your butter wallet around the fair on a warm day might present some rather greasy problems. This system of commodity money works well for local trade, but it has its limits. That blacksmith can use the cloth to have a new cloak made for his wife. But what about the merchant over there, the one selling fine glass beads from the Rhineland? He has no desire to haul a dozen rolls of Manx wool back across the Irish Sea. He wants something more portable, more universal, more valuable. He wants silver. And so you witness a second, very different kind of transaction. A wealthy chieftain wants to buy an ornate drinking horn with silver fittings. He doesn't have coins in the way you'd recognize them. Instead, he pulls out a soft leather pouch and empties its contents into his palm. It's a glittering, jumbled mess of metal. A piece of a finely wrought bracelet, a chunk cut from a silver ingot, a flattened and folded coin from an Arabic souk bearing Kufic script, and a bent penny minted by an English king. This is hack silver, and it is the lifeblood of the Viking economy. In this world, the form of the silver is irrelevant. A beautiful piece of jewelry is worth exactly the same as a lump of unworked metal, provided they have the same weight and purity. The crucial piece of technology in this transaction is a small, delicate set of folding balance scales that the merchant produces from his own pouch. He sets a small polished stone weight into one of the bronze pans. The chieftain then begins placing his silver fragments into the other. It's a little too light. The chieftain takes a handsome silver arm ring from his wrist, places it on a small anvil, and with a casual tap of a hammer and chisel shears a small piece off the end. The intricate design is brutally severed. He adds the new fragment to the pan. The scales waver and then balance perfectly. The deal is done. This is the heart of the bullion economy. Value is weight. It is tangible, measurable, and absolute. Of course, this system relied on a shared understanding of weights and measures, which wasn't always as standard as you might think. Archaeologists and historians still argue about the exact standardized weights used in the Viking world, as different regions seem to have used slightly different systems, making long-distance trade a complex affair of constant remeasurement. The chieftain's weights, based on a Norse standard, might differ slightly from the merchant's based on a Dublin one. This would lead to another round of haggling, not just over the price of the horn, but over the very weight of the silver used to pay for it. You now understand the legal judgments in a new light. When the farmer in the earlier case was ordered to pay 3 silver marks, it wasn't a demand for a specific number of coins. It was a demand for a specific weight of silver. He would have to go through his own small hoard of hack silver, or trade his goods for it, until he had the required amount to be weighed and verified by the court. Holding a piece of this brutally chopped silver, perhaps a fragment of what was once a beautiful brooch, you grasp the unsentimental and deeply practical nature of this world. Value here is not an abstract promise. It is the real, measurable, and gleaming substance of wealth itself. As the long day of law and commerce begins to fade towards evening, you take a moment to step back from the crowds and look at the landscape of the assembly itself. Your eyes are drawn to the two distinct centers of power that dominate the site, Tynwald Hill and the Chapel of St. John. The hill is a low, green, tiered mound of earth. It feels ancient, organic, rooted in the soil and the pre-Christian past. It speaks of the old Norse gods, of Odin, the All-Father who seeks wisdom, and Thor, the defender of order. Then there is the chapel. It is made of stone, a solid, permanent structure with clear lines and a single dominant purpose. It represents the world of the White Christ, the faith that was already established here among the Manx Gaels and was now sweeping through the Norse world itself. In another place, at another time, these two structures might represent two worlds at war, a battleground between paganism and Christianity. But here at Tynwald, you are witnessing something far more subtle and fascinating. You are seeing a merger, a process of religious and cultural blending known as syncretism. The entire ceremony is a testament to this fusion. The king and his chieftains, the Christianized elite, begin their council within the stone walls of the chapel. But to proclaim their laws and affirm their power before all the people, they must walk the rush-strewn path to the ancient earthen hill. The authority of the new faith is used to legitimize the decisions, but the traditions of the old faith are used to enact them publicly. One world flows into the other, not as a conquest, but as a convergence. You wander over to a quiet corner of the churchyard and see the most stunning physical evidence of this merger, a Manx stone cross. It is carved in the unmistakable shape of the Christian cross, a powerful symbol of the new religion. But as you look closer at the intricate carvings that cover its surface, you see scenes not from the Bible, but from the heroic legends of your own pagan ancestors. On one panel, a bearded figure who can only be Odin is shown with his raven. On another, a scene depicts the hero Sigurd slaying the dragon Fafnir and roasting its heart. Here, on a single sacred stone, the stories of the Norse gods and heroes share space with the supreme symbol of Christianity. It's a breathtaking accommodation, a theological treaty carved in stone. The message seems to be that one can be both a good Christian and a good Norseman. The old tales of courage and fate do not need to be discarded, but can be incorporated into the new worldview. This blending extends to personal belief. You observe a chieftain, a man known to have been baptized, emerging from the chapel looking pious. Later, as dusk settles, you see the same man walk to the edge of a nearby stream and quietly pour a small amount of ale onto the ground, a private offering to the Landvetir, the ancient spirits of the land. This isn't necessarily hypocrisy. It is a form of spiritual pragmatism. Many Norse people of this era practiced a kind of dual faith. It was wise to accept Christ, especially for political and trade reasons with the powerful Christian kingdom surrounding the Irish Sea. But when you were about to set sail on a dangerous voyage, it couldn't hurt to say a prayer to Thor, the god of thunder and storms, just in case. It was a way of hedging your bets, of collecting all the divine protection you could get. The very process of this conversion is a topic of intense fascination. Historians and archaeologists still argue about the speed and nature of the conversion. Was it a top-down process where kings and chieftains converted for political reasons, or a more gradual grassroots change among the general population? A king's conversion could bring his entire kingdom officially into the Christian fold, but old habits die hard. It was likely a messy, overlapping process. Norsemen marrying local Christian women would see their children raised in the new faith. At the same time, a king might get baptized to secure a valuable trade agreement with a Christian ruler in England. As you stand in the twilight caught between the dark, silent mound and the stone chapel from which you can hear the faint sound of evening prayers, you realize that the spiritual identity of this place is as much of a hybrid as its language and its people. The old gods haven't been vanquished. They are simply learning to share their sacred spaces. The oaths sworn on the iron ring may now invoke the name of Christ alongside Odin and Thor. The priest chieftain, the Godi, might wear a cross beneath his tunic. This is a faith in transition, a slow, patient weaving of two different spiritual threads into a single, uniquely Manx Norse tapestry. For centuries, the world you have been experiencing, This vibrant, self-contained Manx Norse kingdom, with its unique blend of cultures and its ancient assembly at Tynwald, has existed in a delicate balance. It has thrived in the spaces between its larger neighbors. But the world does not stand still. Now, you feel a profound shift in the very air of the assembly. The scene fast-forwards through time. 2 centuries have passed in the blink of an eye. You are now standing on the same field, looking at the same hill in the middle of the 13th century. The rituals look the same, but the mood is heavy with anxiety. The winds of change gusting from across the sea are blowing into a gale. The geopolitical landscape has transformed. The kingdom of man in the Isles is no longer a major player in a chaotic sea of competing lordships. It is now a small, vulnerable state caught between 2 giants. A powerful, unified kingdom of Scotland to the north, determined to consolidate its western borders, and a kingdom of Norway that is increasingly distant, its attention focused on matters closer to home. The era of the Viking sea kings, once the terror of the waves, is drawing to its close. The great nations of Scotland and England are on the rise, and they have little patience for an independent Norse holdout in the middle of the Irish Sea. The breaking point arrives in the year 1263. The aging but still formidable King Haakon IV of Norway, determined to reassert his ancestral authority over the Isles, gathers a massive fleet, perhaps over 100 ships, and sails for the Scottish coast. It is the last great Viking armada to ever sail in these waters. The Scottish king, Alexander III, responds with cunning. He draws out negotiations, playing for time, knowing that his greatest ally is not his army, but the notorious Scottish autumn weather. And the weather does not disappoint. As the negotiations stall, a series of violent gales roars down from the north. Haakon's fleet, anchored off the coast near Largs, is savaged. Ships drag their anchors, collide with each other, and are smashed against the rocky shoreline. The ensuing Battle of Largs is less a great, decisive clash of arms, and more a series of desperate, chaotic skirmishes on the beach between shipwrecked Norwegian soldiers and the waiting Scottish forces. The real victor of the battle was the storm. Humiliated, his fleet in tatters and his army depleted, Haakon had no choice but to retreat to Orkney to wait out the winter. He would never see Norway again. He fell ill and died there a few months later. The death of the king and the destruction of his fleet was the death knell for the Norse kingdom in the west. Haakon's successor, Magnus VI, had neither the resources nor the will to continue the fight. The age of sea power was giving way to the age of treaties and territorial consolidation. In 1266, far from the Isle of Man, in the Scottish city of Perth, a deal was struck. With the stroke of a pen, King Magnus of Norway signed the Treaty of Perth, formally ceding the Hebrides and the Isle of Man to the Kingdom of Scotland, in exchange for a large payment of 4,000 marks of silver. For centuries, Norse kings had extracted silver from these lands through raiding. Now, a Norse king was selling them for it. You are standing now at a Tynwald assembly held in the shadow of this treaty. The Manx king on the hill is a king in name only. He is now a vassal of Scotland. The chieftains look at each other with uncertainty. The raven banner may still fly, but it has lost its meaning. A profound sense of loss and anxiety permeates the gathering. What will the new Scottish masters do? Will they respect this ancient thing, this open-air parliament, or will they sweep it away, replacing the law speaker with a sheriff and the Norse law with the feudal laws of Scotland? You look into the faces of the common Manx people, and you see a complex mix of emotions. Historians still argue about the true allegiance of the Manx people during this conflict. Did they see themselves as loyal subjects of the distant Norwegian crown, or as a distinct people caught between 2 powerful and competing neighbors? For the Old Norse warrior aristocracy, this is a moment of profound betrayal. For the Manx Gaelic farmers, perhaps it is simply the trading of one foreign overlord for another. Their loyalty is to the soil beneath their feet, to Mannan itself, not to a distant king in either Norway or Scotland. The great assembly carries on, but every word spoken seems fragile. Every ritual a potential ghost of a tradition on the verge of extinction. Tynwald has survived for centuries. The question on everyone's mind is simple and terrifying. Will it survive this? You stand on the Tynwald field, the air thick with the uncertainty of the new Scottish rule. The fear, a cold knot in the stomach of every Manxman present, is that this ancient assembly will be deemed a relic of a conquered people and swept aside. You expect to see Scottish sheriffs and feudal bailiffs arrive, to see the old ways dismantled in favor of a new alien system of governance. But what happens is something far stranger, more chaotic, and ultimately the key to Tynwald's miraculous survival. The decades following the Treaty of Perth are not a time of simple transition, but of violent turmoil. The Isle of Man, a strategic prize in the middle of the Irish Sea, becomes a political football, kicked back and forth in the brutal game of the Wars of Scottish Independence. One year, the island is under the control of the Scots. A few years later, an English fleet appears, and King Edward the Iron of England seizes it, installing his own governor. Then Robert the Bruce, the great Scottish warrior king, retakes it. The lordship of the island is granted, revoked, and reconquered so many times that the average farmer could be forgiven for not knowing who his ultimate overlord was supposed to be. In the midst of this chaos, with Scottish and English lords coming and going like the tides, Tynwald becomes the only source of stability. It is the one constant in a world of violent change. While foreign kings and barons fought for control of the island's castles, the assembly at St. John's was the only institution capable of handling the mundane but essential business of daily life. Disputes still needed settling, thieves still needed judging, and some semblance of order had to be maintained. The new overlords, whether English or Scottish, were often absentee rulers, far more concerned with their wars than with the administration of a small, remote island. They quickly realized that it was far easier and more profitable to use the existing functioning system of Manx governance than to try and replace it. And so Tynwald survived, not because its new masters were sentimental about its ancient traditions, but because it was useful. It was the machine that kept the island running and, most importantly, collected the taxes that could be sent back to their new lord. This pragmatic reality is at the heart of a great historical question. Historians still argue about the reasons for Tynwald's remarkable survival. Was it because the new overlords recognized its efficiency as a tool of local governance, or was it simply due to the island's isolation and the fierce cultural conservatism of the Manx people who refused to let their traditions die? The truth, most likely, is a combination of both. It was a partnership of convenience. The Manx kept their assembly, and the new lords got a self-governing island that caused them minimal trouble. But this survival came at the cost of adaptation. Tynwald bent so that it would not break. The changes were gradual but profound. The great sovereign king of man in the Isles is gone forever. After a period under Scottish rule, the island passes definitively into English hands. The new English rulers, eventually the powerful Stanley family, adopt the title Lord of Man. This was a deliberate and significant change. A king implies sovereignty. A lord is a subject, a title held under the authority of a higher monarch, the King of England. The Isle of Man was no longer a kingdom, but a lordship. The face on the top tier of the hill changes. It is no longer a Manx Norse sea king, but an English governor, representing the absent lord. The language of the assembly begins to shift. While Manx Gaelic remains the language of the people, the formal proceedings of the court start to be peppered with the Norman French, and later, the Middle English of the new administration. The Norse chieftains are slowly replaced by or transform into something more like English-style barons or commissioners. Yet, the core of the institution holds. The assembly still meets at St. John's. The laws are still proclaimed from the ancient four-tiered hill. The island is still administered through its 17 ancient parishes. Tynwald sheds its Viking skin and dons the garb of an English feudal lordship, but its heart, the open-air assembly of the people, continues to beat. It is a masterclass in institutional survival, a stubborn refusal to be extinguished. You find yourself at a Tynwald assembly in the early 15th century. The island is now firmly under the lordship of the English Stanley family. The great wars for control have faded, leaving a sense of stability, but also one of profound, irreversible change. The rituals of the assembly continue, but a deep and fundamental part of the tradition, the very heart of the Old Norse way, is about to be deliberately stopped. The living, breathing, spoken law, held for centuries in the minds of the law speakers, is about to be captured and put on a page. For generation after generation, the system of the breast laws, the law held in the breast of the law speaker, worked. It was a system built on prodigious memory, communal trust, and the power of poetic verse. But in this new world, it is becoming a liability. The new English lords and their administrators cannot govern an island whose laws exist only in the head of a local man, recited in a language they barely understand. The system is opaque, vulnerable to the fading memory of an aging man, and resistant to the kind of centralized control that the new rulers favor. The pressure to modernize, to standardize, is immense. According to Manx tradition, the final push came not from the lords but from the people. You see a delegation of prominent Manx freemen approach the king's governor. They present a petition. They complain that the laws are no longer certain, that different law speakers remember things in different ways, leading to inconsistent judgments. They ask their new lord to command that the laws of man be put into writing, so that they may be permanent, known and unchangeable for all time. It is a powerful, almost poignant moment. A community, whose ancestors revered the power of the spoken word, now demanding the certainty of the written one. Whether driven by this popular demand or by their own administrative needs, the command is given. In the year 1417, a great and solemn assembly is convened by the Lord of Man, Sir John Stanley. It is not just a regular Tynwald, it is a constitutional convention. The two law speakers, or deemsters as they are now more commonly known, are summoned, along with a council of the wisest elders of the land. Their task is monumental and bittersweet. They are to perform their ancient duty one last time, not for the assembled masses, but for a small group of scribes armed with ink, quills, and stacks of expensive vellum. You watch this process unfold over days. It is a slow, methodical extraction of an entire legal culture. A deemster stands and recites a section of the law from memory, his voice perhaps still holding the rhythmic cadence of the old alliterative verse. He speaks of vergild, of inheritance, of the rules of the thing. And the scribes listen, their quills scratching furiously, translating the ancient oral formulas into the formal, structured prose of a 15th century legal document. They are changing the very nature of the law, turning it from a flowing river of tradition into a fixed, frozen block of text. It is, you imagine, like trying to write down a song by only describing the notes, losing all the music in the process. What was the true motive for this great codification? Historians still argue about the primary motivation for this codification. Was it a popular demand for legal transparency, as the story of the petition suggests? Or was it a top-down effort by the new English lords to understand and control the unfamiliar laws of their new domain? By forcing the laws onto paper, the Stanleys could have them translated, studied, and compared to English common law. It was an act of taking intellectual possession of the island, a way of mastering its customs in order to better rule it. The consequences of this act were immediate and profound. The role of the deemster was transformed forever. He was no longer the living oracle of the law. His authority no longer came from his memory, but from his ability to read and interpret the new written statutes. He became a judge, a legal scholar, not a bard. The law itself also changed. Once frozen in print, it lost its ability to subtly evolve with each recitation. It became more rigid, more resistant to change, but also more predictable. A new kind of power was born on the island. The power of the literate man, the clerk, and the lawyer who could now argue not from memory or tradition, but from the unassailable authority of the written word. You look at a finished page, a mass of black ink on a pale sheet. The soul of the Viking law has been given a new, permanent, and much more manageable body. You are holding in your hand a page from the newly written statutes of man, a product of the great 15th century codification. The script is a form of Middle English, the language of the new administration. The law, once a living, breathing thing of memory and recitation, is now fixed in ink. It seems as though the old Norse world has been completely overwritten, translated and filed away. But as you scan the unfamiliar text, you begin to notice them. Strange, hard-angled words that are not English, not Gaelic, not Latin. They are intruders, foreigners in the neat lines of the scribe's work. You are looking at the ghosts of Viking words, linguistic fossils preserved in the amber of the law. When the scribes set about their monumental task, they ran into a problem. The Manx Norse legal system contained concepts for which there were no simple English equivalents. Rather than invent a clumsy new term, they often did something much simpler. They just kept the old one. And so the written law became a museum of Old Norse legal terminology, preserving the language of the former rulers long after their power had vanished. The most obvious example, of course, is the very name of the institution, Tynwald. As you now know, it is a direct descendant of the Old Norse Thingvalar, the assembly field. The name was so integral to the place that it was never even questioned. You then look at the title of the judges who now preside over the courts. They are called deemsters. The word sounds archaic and strange to English ears, and for good reason. It is pure Norse. It comes from the Old Norse word domrar, meaning judgment, combined with stiori, meaning steerer or manager. A deemster, then, is a judgment steerer, a wonderfully poetic and accurate description of a judge's role. The term survived because it perfectly encapsulated the function of the office in a way that the English term judge did not fully capture for the Manx people. The linguistic fossils are everywhere once you learn to spot them. The island is divided into 6 administrative districts. They are not called counties or shires, they are called sheetings. This peculiar word is believed to derive from the Old Norse skeeting, which meant a division or a share. Some have suggested it was a ship division, referring to a district that was required to provide a certain number of men or a whole vessel for the king's fleet. The members of the Manx Parliament, the body that meets to this day, are known as the House of Keys. While its origin is debated, one of the strongest theories links it back to the Old Norse verb kjosa, to choose. They were the chosen men. The very building blocks of the island's government speak with a Norse accent. This linguistic survival is not confined to the law. You look up from the assembly field toward the highest peak on the island. Its name is Snæfell. It sounds vaguely familiar, but when you break it down, it is as Norse as a dragon-proud longship. Snæ, meaning snow, and fjall, meaning mountain or fell. It is simply snow mountain. The rivers and towns tell the same story. The town of Ramsey comes from Ramsawe, Wild Garlic River. Laxey comes from Laxae, Salmon River. The Vikings didn't just conquer this island, they named it. Their language is written into the very fabric of the landscape. This raises a fascinating question. Were these Norse words and names just the jargon of a ruling elite imposed on a Gaelic-speaking population? Or did the common people themselves speak a form of Norse? Linguists and historians still argue about the extent to which Old Norse was spoken by the general Manx Gaelic population, or if it remained primarily the administrative and elite language of the ruling class. The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. The Norse settlers over generations gradually abandoned their mother tongue for everyday use and assimilated into the majority Manx Gaelic culture. But in the process, they left behind a rich deposit of loanwords, legal terms, and place names, a permanent linguistic layer in the island's complex geology. As you stand here centuries after the end of the Viking kingdom, you realize that the Norse haven't truly left. Their language haunts the place. It whispers from the pages of the law books and echoes in the names of the mountains and rivers. The Viking Age may be over, its warriors and kings long turned to dust, but its voice can still be heard by anyone who knows how to listen. The centuries peel away, the faces of English lords, Manx chieftains, and Norse sea kings blurring and fading. Now, you feel the solid ground of the present beneath your feet. The air is the same, the soft, damp Manx air, but it now carries the distant sound of car engines and the chatter of smartphone cameras. You are standing on the Tynwald field. Not in the 15th century, not in the 10th, but today. The date is the 5th of July. The ceremony you have witnessed in its ancient form is not a historical reconstruction. It is about to happen again, right now, as a living, breathing part of a modern nation's government. The scene is a spectacular paradox, a collision of worlds. The 4-tiered hill Tynwald is unchanged, its green slopes as ancient and unassuming as ever. Thousands of people are still gathered here. There is still a fair with stalls selling food and crafts. But now, the crowd is a sea of brightly colored modern clothing. Tourists with cameras mingle with locals. The procession that forms at the Chapel of St. John is a bewildering and beautiful mix of the ancient and the contemporary. There are still men-at-arms, but they are ceremonial guards. There are judges in robes and horsehair wigs, a tradition more English than Norse. The members of the House of Keys are not landowners chosen by a chieftain, but democratically elected politicians in sober modern suits, and the figure at the head of the procession, representing the Lord of Man, is the Lieutenant Governor, an appointee of the British Crown. Yet as the procession begins its slow walk down the rush-strewn path, the deep ancient roots of the ceremony break through the modern surface. The first official to act is the Tynwald fencer. He steps forward, holding a ceremonial sword, and cries out in a loud, clear voice a formula that is centuries old. First in English, then in the revived Manx Gaelic, he fences the court, demanding that no one brawl, quarrel, or cause a disturbance, a direct and living echo of the sacred peace, the Summa Helgi, of the Viking thing. It is a thrilling, goosebump-inducing moment, a direct verbal link to the assemblies you have witnessed in the distant past. The main business of the day, as it has always been, is the promulgation of the laws. A deemster stands and reads a summary of every act that has been passed by the Manx Parliament over the last year. The topics are thoroughly modern, laws about finance, healthcare, data protection. But the act of proclamation is ancient. And crucially, after each law is summarized in English, it is read again in Manx Gaelic. The bilingual tradition, born of the practical need for a Norse elite to govern a Gaelic population, has survived for over 1,000 years, now a proud assertion of the island's unique cultural identity. You might wonder about the date. Why July 5th? This, too, is a fossil. The ceremony was originally held on June 24th, the feast of St. John the Baptist, which conveniently coincided with the old pagan festival of midsummer. In 1753, when the British Empire switched from the old Julian calendar to the more accurate Gregorian calendar, a total of 11 days were skipped. The fiercely traditional Manx people, however, insisted on holding their national day on the real Midsummer's Day. So, they simply added 11 days to June 24th, and have been holding the ceremony on July 5th ever since. It's a perfect act of stubborn conservative continuity. Of course, this modern ceremony is not without its critics. Sociologists and cultural critics still argue whether the modern Tynwald ceremony is a genuine, unbroken continuation of ancient tradition, or a carefully curated, invented tradition, romanticized and formalized in the 19th and 20th centuries to promote a unique Manx national identity. It is true that many elements have been polished and perfected over time to create a more impressive spectacle, and yet, the core cannot be denied. It is still an open-air parliamentary assembly. It is still held on the same mound, and ordinary citizens still have the right to present petitions of grievance directly to their government here on the Hill, a direct continuation of the most basic function of the ancient thing. You watch as a modern elected politician takes their designated place on the same tier once occupied by a Viking warrior. You hear a law about internet regulations proclaimed from the same spot where a law about the price of an ox was once announced. Tynwald is not a reenactment. It is the ultimate survivor, a 1,000-year-old political institution that has adapted, evolved, and stubbornly persisted into the 21st century. You stand in the modern crowd at Tynwald, watching the ancient ceremony unfold. All around you on banners and tourist pamphlets, and in the proud declarations of the local Manx people, you see the same phrase repeated like a mantra. Tynwald, the world's oldest continuous parliament. It is a bold, prestigious claim, one that forms a cornerstone of the island's national identity. But as you have seen, history is a messy, complicated thing. And in the world of historical superlatives, there are always rivals. Is that famous claim actually true? To answer that, you have to delve into one of the most passionate and pedantic debates in parliamentary history. First, you must lay out Tynwald's case. The traditional founding date is given as 979 AD. The crucial, undeniable strength of its claim is its unbroken record. As you have witnessed, it has met every year without fail. It survived the fall of the Norse kingdom of the Isles. It persisted through the violent tug-of-war between Scotland and England. It adapted under the rule of English lords. Through plague, war, and political upheaval, the assembly on the Hill has gathered. The laws have been proclaimed. Its continuity, is its crown jewel. But far to the northwest, across a vast stretch of the cold Atlantic, another volcanic island settled by Norsemen has its own formidable claim. This is Iceland, and its parliament is the Althing. And here is the first, inescapable fact. The Althing is older. It was founded in the year 930 AD at a spectacular rift valley called Tynwald, a place of immense natural beauty and historical significance. For centuries, it was the heart of the Icelandic Commonwealth, a unique medieval republic without a king. Based on founding date alone, the Althing has Tynwald beaten by nearly half a century. So why isn't the matter settled? Why does Tynwald get to make its claim at all? The answer lies in a 45-year gap. After Iceland fell under the control of the Danish crown, the Althing's power, much like Tynwald's, was slowly eroded, but its fate was more severe. In the year 1800, the Danish king formally abolished the Althing. For the first time in 870 years, the Great Assembly did not meet. The institution ceased to exist. It was only in 1845, as a new wave of Icelandic nationalism began to rise, that the Althing was re-established by the Danes, not as a sovereign parliament, but as a consultative assembly, and in a new location, the capital city of Reykjavik. And so you have the heart of the dispute. The entire debate hinges on the deceptively simple word, continuous. Proponents of Tynwald's claim argue with impeccable logic. The Althing may be older in origin, but it broke. There is a 45-year gap in its existence. Tynwald never broke. Therefore, Tynwald is the world's oldest continuous parliament. Supporters of the Althing counter that the modern Icelandic parliament is the direct legal and spiritual successor of the original, and that the 45-year period was merely a temporary suspension, not a true termination of the institution. It's an argument that pits the spirit of continuity against the letter of the law. This isn't just a two-horse race either. The tiny Republic of San Marino claims its parliament, the Grand and General Council, descends from a Roman-era body, which would make it far older, though its structure and history are vastly different. Some local things in Norway can claim to have been meeting on the same spot for even longer than Tynwald or the Althing, but they never evolved from a regional court into a national parliament. The Tynwald versus Althing debate remains the main event, the clash of the Viking legacy titans. In the end, there is no definitive referee to make the call. It comes down to definition. If your sole criterion is the original founding date, Iceland's Althing wins. But if you insist on a perfect, unbroken record of annual operation, then the prize goes to the stubborn, resilient assembly on the Isle of Man. The Manx have been brilliant in their marketing, always using that magic word, continuous, to stake their claim. As you stand here, you realize the debate itself is less important than the astonishing fact that this argument is even possible. Both institutions are a stunning testament to a shared Norse heritage, a belief in law, and the tradition of meeting under an open sky to decide the fate of a nation. Tynwald's claim is more than just a tourist slogan. It is the ultimate summary of its entire history. It survived. The long, eventful day is over. The last of the tourists have drifted away, the fair stalls are packed and gone, and the ceremonial flags have been taken down. A deep, resonant quiet settles over the plain of St. John's. In the soft, golden light of the late evening, you find yourself walking towards the hill. There is no one to stop you now. You place your foot on the lowest of the 4 tiers and begin to climb. The grass is soft and a little damp underfoot, worn down by the tread of more than 1,000 years of history. You ascend past the tier of the ancient parishes, past the tier of the chosen keys, past the tier of the great lords, until you are standing on the small, flat summit. You are standing where the king once sat. From here you can see the entire sacred landscape laid out before you. The stone chapel, the straight, rush-strewn path, the green fields stretching away to the distant purple hills. The ever-present Manx wind, the constant companion of this island, blows steadily, whispering in your ears. And as you stand here, alone in the quiet, the ghosts of all the scenes you have witnessed seem to rise from the turf. You can almost hear the faint, rhythmic chant of the law speaker, reciting the ancient, poetic code that lived only in his mind. You feel the phantom weight of the cold iron oath ring in your palm, the terrifying sanctity of a spoken promise. You can almost smell the wood smoke from 1,000 festival fires, hear the distant echo of a Norse chieftain's laughter, and the sharp, metallic clang of shields and swords as a new law is hammered into existence. This small hill has seen everything. It has been the center of a proud Norse sea kingdom. It has felt the tread of Scottish conquerors and the stern gaze of English governors. It has heard the law proclaimed in Old Norse, in Manx Gaelic, in Norman French, and in the English of a dozen different eras. It has been a pagan sacral site, the backdrop for Christian ceremony, and the stage for modern secular democracy. Its story is one of ultimate survival, of a stubborn, quiet refusal to be erased. Historians, archaeologists, and dreamers will always argue about the precise details of that first assembly, about its exact date and form. But the overwhelming reality of its persistence silences all debate. It is here. It endured. An old man walking his dog along the path sees you on the hill and gives a friendly wave. He calls out, his voice carrying on the wind, "Be sure you think good thoughts up there." They say it's bad luck to speak ill of the law on Tynwald Hill. In his simple, smiling warning, you hear the faintest echo of the ancient superstitions, the belief in the land spirits, the Muinjurvegi, the sacred peace that must be kept. The old magic has not vanished entirely. It has just softened into folklore. This quiet, grassy mound remains the sovereign heart of the Isle of Man. It is still the seat of the High Court of Tynwald, a modern parliament with its elected House of Keys and its revising legislative council, the direct, unbroken descendant of that first gathering of Vikings. The sun dips below the horizon and the sky is awash with deep orange and purple. The wind picks up and you feel a profound sense of connection, of standing at the absolute center of a millennium of human endeavor. This hill is not just a place of law, but a monument to memory, to identity, and to the simple, powerful idea that a community must gather to decide its own fate. The wind blows, carrying with it an echo, a whisper, 1,000 years of voices speaking of justice, of order, and of home. And so, our long journey together tonight comes to its gentle end. The last light has faded from the Manx sky, leaving the ancient hill to its quiet communion with the stars. The voices of the past have settled back into the earth, their stories told, their echoes now softly resting in the cool night air. Let the deep peace of that wind-swept place settle over you now. Let the sound of the soft, distant waves and the whisper of the wind through the tall grass be a comforting blanket. There are no more facts to learn, no more histories to uncover. There is only the quiet, the calm, and the gentle descent into rest. All the centuries of strife and survival have resolved into this single, peaceful moment, a silence earned by 1,000 years of persistence. Allow your own thoughts to soften and drift, carrying you gently away from this place and towards the quiet shores of your own sleep. The story is over. The hill is at peace, and now so are you.